Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I should say my grateful thanks to my backing band, Rhinestone Valley. They refused to come on to do a second spot with me because they didn't like what I was going to say. So, but never mind. You'll just have to make do with me, I'm afraid. So, okay, I'm just a jobbing evolutionary ecologist, evolutionary psychologist. Most of the time I'm interested in social evolution, in mammals, primates, and humans to some extent. But my background is studying monkeys in the field and antelope, another really interesting species. So the question is, why on earth would I be interested in religion? Well, it turns out that all evolutionary biologists end up studying religion. I'll just tell you a little. I was at a workshop many, many years ago, very small workshop, had nothing to do with religion. Lots of famous evolutionary biologists and the like, animal behaviorists. And we all had to introduce ourselves. And around the room, people were going, all the older ones, I hasten to add, I was quite young then. I'm so-and-so, and I study children's behavior, and I've written a book on the evolution of religion. Next one, I study some other aspect of behavior, and I've written a book on the evolution of God. We got to the famous evolutionary geneticist John Maynard Smith, who many people regarded as the second most famous biologist evolutionary biologist after Darwin. And he was probably about 75 at the time, and he looked around the room and he said, "I am God." And he was one of those people who just knew everything. So anyway, it seems that all evolutionary biologists, psychologists and the like, eventually they get interested in the evolution of religion. So I'm no exception. But actually, the reason I got interested in it primarily is because it just seemed odd to me that humans would spend so much time, mental effort, and money, and I don't know what else, engaging in an activity which a lot of evolutionary people said was maladaptive. Just doesn't make any sense. Evolution isn't that kind of careless. It tends to be quite, if you like, quite on the ball, and things evolve only because they're useful to the organism. So this looks rather like a case where you have a behavior which is widespread, everybody, all human cultures do it. It must have some function. So the question is what? And it dawned on me that probably its real function has nothing to do, nothing to do with the usual things that people ask of religion. Is it beneficial for you personally? The answer is no. It's beneficial for the whole community. What it's about is community bonding. So that's what I'm going to try and persuade you that this is the case. Religion, we've known for well over 100 years now, 150 years probably, that religion evolved in two major stages. The first major stage was these kind of things on the screen there. These are Kung San hunter-gatherers from southern Africa engaging in a trance dance. So they dance themselves into a fit where they lose consciousness and go into trance. And during that, they visit the spirit world and do things up there. And they do these kind of dances about once a month. What's interesting about them, actually, is the reason they do it. They actually do it when relationships in the community have got very edgy and fragmented. And someone will say, "Oh, it's time we had a trance dance." They all go away and do a trance dance, and they come out of it. It's almost like rebooting the computer, rebooting the social relationships within the community. Everybody feels friendly again. And then you get a period where relationships decay, and they have another one. And they've been doing it for a long time, because the black and white drawing at the bottom is from a cave painting from about 0 AD. It's 2,000 years old as it's been dated at. So they've been doing it exactly the same thing. You can see the same things, the dancing sticks. They have the women singing and clapping on the right-hand side there. That phase is very old. These are animist religions. They have no gods as such. There are spirits in the spirit world whom you can go and visit when you're in trance and the spirit world travels. They have no moral codes, divinely inspired moral codes. They have a moral code, but it's a social moral code. It's not handed down by God or gods. And they believe in spirits everywhere, streams and wells and rivers and mountains and all these kinds of things. And then sometime, probably in the Neolithic, after the last ice age ended, you had new kinds of religion emerging, which eventually gave rise to these religions, which you'll be much more familiar with. A Catholic high mass at the top, and these are Zoroastrians, Parsi Zoroastrians, who are probably the oldest organized religion of the major world religions. And a lot of Zoroastrian ideas filtered into Judaism and from Judaism into Christianity and Islam. So here they are. These are called the revealed religions because they're all handed down by some prophet who God gave the knowledge to. They believe in a high God, a single supreme God. They're monotheistic. Moral codes are handed down from on high. And this God takes an interest in you, in people, their behavior. But there's a kind of stage that nobody ever comments on, which sits in the middle. And it's this stuff. And these are known as doctrinal religions, and they're really the intervening step. They appear for the first time around about 8,000 years ago. After the last ice age, and they provide a stepping stone onto the revealed religions which come much later. And you'll be very familiar with the one on the left there, because it's your religion, right? This is Odin, whom the Anglo-Saxons called Woden, with his wife Freya. And this gives me pause at this point to thank you very much, all you Danes in the audience, because it's a Danish anniversary this year, and you didn't even know it. Yes, exactly 1,000 years ago, we were in the middle of King Canute's kingship. In Britain, we had the same king. Right? It was King of Denmark and King of England. It's slightly murkier than that, I might point out, because we were a happy little island off the coast of Europe, and a bunch of winged helmet people turned up from Denmark and said, "We're here now. We're taking you over." So England was actually a Danish colony. We're still waiting for you to claim it again. But, all good colonists like to leave a little marker. So the rest of you who are not Danes in the audience can speak to them afterwards, because they are the people who caused English to sound like it does now, right? We spoke a very nice German language, which had proper grammar at the end. And this lot turned up and said, "We can't understand a word you're saying. We're going to get rid of all that grammar stuff because we don't like it, and we're going to simplify the language for you." Very nicely, you left us one little bit. There's one little bit of our old Germanic Anglo-Saxon grammar. That's the apostrophe S for the possessive case, because it's the same in Norse languages. So I don't know what it would be in Danish, but in Swedish, it would be something like, Stockholm's Universitet, meaning the University of Stockholm, right? So it was exactly the same in Anglo-Saxon. So we were allowed to keep that by our colonial masters. And they said, yes, at the end of the day, so you had what was a nice Germanic language, stripped of all its grammar, and then it let off. So I like to think of this, of the Danish revenge on the rest of the world. Because 1,000 years ago, you let this rabbit loose, and then you just sat back quietly and waited to see what happened. And thought, these poor bastards out there are going to have to learn this language. And English is one of the most complicated languages there is. Just to put it in context, sorry, we're straying from, this is the previous lecture, by the way, if you want the religion one, it comes next. French has a total vocabulary of 60,000, which is about the number of words that any language user of any language has, an adult. English has 800,000. And that's because it's actually an amalgam of many different languages. So even native English speakers don't know how to use all the words in English. It means we have often as many as 10 words for the same thing, which allows us to confuse everybody else. So they don't quite understand what we mean. But it's very nice of you because, a bunch of dodgy Norwegians turned up who'd been camping in France for about 2 generations after you. This is the person we know as William the Conqueror. Remember, he moved you out, right? He got rid of the Danish kings. So I suspect that in Danish history books, he's referred to as William the Evictor. But for every word in English, we have a French word from the Normans, which is usually, flowing and multisyllabic and musical. So if we want to be polite, we use the French word version. And then we have the Anglo-Saxon version, which is the old one, and that's Germanic, so it's short and blunt. So if we want to be rude to people, we use the old German words. Literally, English speakers do not realize that's what they're doing, but actually that's what happened. And then, of course, there's this whole bunch of Norse words in the middle, so it largely came in through the Danes into England, which give us all the sort of mystical and happy, well-being kinds of words that we need. Which brings us back to Odin and Freya by a long route. And I might point out how nice you were. When you left, you said, okay, we'll let you carry on and we'll go back home and not colonize you any longer. So you don't have to pay us Danegeld anymore. Danegeld, which, for 300 years, we actually had to pay the Danes. So long as you use our language every day to remind you of who you really are. So we have Woden's Day, Wednesday, and Freya's Day, Friday, all these nice Danish gods. And he said, and you don't have to pay us Danegeld, providing you buy our bacon for the next 1,000 years. All right. Was there anything there? Oh, yes, okay. Just more example. The point I want to make here really in this context is, despite these enormous changes in religious style, if you like, going through the doctrinal and the revealed religions, what seems to be kicking along underneath all of them is this mystical, ancient mystical animist sort of activity, mindset, thinking. It appears everywhere. Here are some happy, clappy sort of, I don't know what they are, Protestant somethings, anyway. Up there, the famous whirling dervishes in Islam here, who are a Sufi sect, who go into trance, use dance to go into trance, so they can, their minds can meet with God's mind, as it were. And St. Teresa of Avila, the famous mystic, Spanish mystic, one of the greatest mystics in Catholicism. This mystical stance goes all the way through these religions, this ancient, if you like, tribal form of religion. And it's still with us. If you look around churches today, any of the sort of big churches, the Catholic Church, Anglican Church, the Lutheran Church, these kind of neo-Catholic sort of forms of Protestantism, you'll find all these things going on. We've got, sort of medieval holy wells in Wales, which are still in use. This well has been a holy well since long before the Danes came. We have a new sort of historical, you have BC and AD. AD means after the Danes. The Oracle of Delphi. The Oracle of Delphi was 1,000 years, giving the future, predicting the future. We wear all these talismans, good luck charms, if you like. We light candles in the church for the souls of the departed. We pray for, success in love, for curing illnesses, all these kinds of things. These are very ancient customs. They long predate Christianity. So I'm going to ask 3 questions, or try and answer 3 questions. First one is simply why and when did religions in general evolve? Then why did the doctrinal religions appear when they did? And lastly, why did the revealed religions appear? Okay, so here's the central starting point for any discussion of social evolution in mammals in general. It's what I call the central problem of mammalian sociology. We hate each other. Social life is very stressful. Relationships are difficult things to negotiate. And if you don't know that, where have you been? It comes in 2 forms. One is the stuff sort of on the left, which has much more to do with women. Well, the consequences have much more to do with women. That stress shuts down the menstrual system completely and you become infertile. This is a general mammalian problem, that whole system is extremely sensitive to any form of stress, physical stress or psychological stress. Much more visible is this stuff on the right. I was much too polite to put some Vikings in the middle picture. This is Game of Thrones, I think. It's males hammering the life out of each other. And mostly it's out of each other, I hasten to add, but not entirely. And this is the measure of that. So these are homicide rates in small-scale hunter-gatherer societies from all around the world. These are real data, homicide rates from really over a 50-year period in the first half of the 20th century, essentially, before they were sort of completely brought into modern educational world. And what it does is plot the percent of all deaths that were due to homicide against the size of the group that they're living in. Each one of those dots is one tribal society. And I just draw your attention to how steep and how short that relationship is, so much so that effectively it means that hunter-gatherers cannot live in groups of more than 50 people because they'd end up killing each other. And not to put too fine a point on it, the whole issue with the evolution of society, since we stopped being hunter-gatherers after the end of the last ice age and settled in villages, is how on earth did we do that without killing each other? And that's the question I'm going to try and answer. And it's the case that hunter-gatherers do not live in living groups. Their social world is bigger than that, but you can't have more than about 50 people, men, women, and children living together. Primates suffer from the same thing. All the social systems in mammals in general are an attempt to cope with these 2 problems, the infertility problem and the violence problem, essentially. But species do live in big groups, as it were. How do they do it? Primates do it by forming alliances. These are principally female-female alliances, mostly. But what that does is just keep everybody else off your back long enough to keep the stress effects away. But it's actually a very cognitively demanding process. It's what's known as, the mechanism is what's known as the dual process mechanism in psychology, where you have 2 different things going on in the brain using different neural channels which work in tandem to each other. One of them is this stuff, grooming, and they spend a lot of their day doing this. And what it does is trigger the endorphin system in the brain. Endorphins are an opioid. They're chemically related to morphine. They make you feel very relaxed, peace with the world, calm, and trusting of the people or the person you're doing these activities with. And that then gives you a platform to build a cognitive relationship, a relationship of trust and obligation and reciprocity. In terms of brain power, it is massively demanding, both of these mechanisms. Now, just to show you that we're not exempt from this, my lovely collaborators in Finland ran several actually, very nice neuroimaging studies for us. And this one was to look at grooming. Do we still groom? So we had a bunch of people in a PET scanner. Well, it was boys, actually. It was all boys in the PET scanner. And we had their girlfriends or their wives, partners, stroking them gently on the torso. And then we measured brain activity to see how much the endorphins released by this activity on the skin was being picked up in the brain. Now, I should point out to you, because obviously you don't know much about Finland, that the Finns are very relaxed and calm people. They don't get excited, so they're not going to be hopping around just because their girlfriends are, stroking their chests. This is very serious stuff. But anyway, these are their brains just firing up with endorphins. And we use these kind of physical activities all the time with people with whom we have close relationships, family and closer friends. We're doing it all the time. We don't really think about it. Stroking them, patting them, hugging them, cuddling them, and so on. So it's a still major issue for us in terms of our bonding. And it's the endorphin system that's creating that sense of bonding and warmth towards a particular person. One of the other things we did with our Finnish collaborators is do a huge sample around Europe and also in Japan of where people are allowed to touch you, where you're comfortable touching other people or being touched by them. And this is the sort of picture. The key thing really is to point out that the more white-yellow it is, the better, the more you like it, the more black it is, the less you like it, right? So for particular areas. And you can see you're going from your partner right the way through to strangers. So they were being told to think of a specific person, a specific uncle, a specific friend, etc., and where you're happy to touch them. That's the picture you get. Touching is very restricted in the range of people that you will do it with, and when it comes to strangers, it's here. I'm letting you get close, but not too close, right? Handshakes only. Interestingly, there weren't big differences between the nations, not even between the Japanese and the Europeans. But there were some. I mean, some nations were in Europe were a bit more touchy-feely. Now, I wonder if you can guess who were the most touchy-feely nation in Europe. You're all going to say Italians. You might try the British, it's well known, trait. No, the Finns. They're Finns, are the most touchy-feely people in Europe. And you're going to ask me, why? What do they do? Think about it. What do they spend all day doing? I rest my case. Okay, so touch mechanisms for bonding are very restricted in the range of people you can do it with. Even in monkeys and us. We don't like being touched by strangers, but those whom we have close relationships with, we're very happy to be mauled by them. So how did we get out of that bind when we wanted to shift our group sizes up to very large sizes? Remember, monkeys and apes do not live in groups bigger than 50. That's the large, for average size for a species. No species has average group size bigger than 50. Our group sizes are much bigger. So how did we bridge that gap? The way we're pretty sure now, we did it or our ancestors did it, was with these three activities, what I call our social toolkit. And it came in three stages. Laughter, which is clearly the oldest because it's very visceral. You can't stop laughing. If somebody laughs at your table, you will laugh even if you didn't understand the joke. Even if the joke was in Finnish, you will understand it. You will laugh, you won't understand it, right? And then much later came in singing, but without words, sort of chorusing, dancing. And then once language evolved about 200,000 years ago with our species, Homo sapiens, then you had the religion, the rituals of religion, feasting, eating, and drinking alcohol. Alcohol turns out to be a very good trigger of the endorphin system. Finally, storytelling, especially tragic storytelling. It turns out that psychological pain is experienced in exactly the same part of the brain as physical pain. And it's physical pain that the endorphin's responding to, essentially. So what we've done is brought these on to allow group size to increase through time. We've shown with all of them that they trigger the endorphin system, and particularly if it's highly synchronized, and most of these are synchronized behaviors. The more synchronized it is, the more it ramps up the endorphin system, and the warmer, more bonded it makes you feel to the people you're doing it with. And again, our Finnish collaborators have shown with laughter in particular, that this is your head going crazy every time you laugh, a relaxed belly laugh, as it were. It just all over the brain, the endorphin receptors are absorbing. And with all the others, we've shown similarly different measures of endorphin activation. It's endorphins that are kicking behind it. So we thought we should look at the rituals of religion and see if this is what was happening. And we did this with a bunch of different religions, primarily a bunch of Christian, Protestant, and Roman Catholic services where they allowed us to go in. We used a pain threshold change, so a sort of painful exercise. Actually, it was a blood pressure monitor like you get at the doctor's. We used that. How long can you stand that blown up on your arm? Because change in that, or we know from previous studies, if endorphins are released, it increases the pain threshold you have. You can tolerate more pain. So, these very nice Protestant services and even Catholic services allowed us to go in to their services. We actually did it in some mosques as well, but unfortunately, lockdown kicked in right in the middle and we didn't get a decent sample. We did it with a bunch of yoga classes. We did it with Sunday assembly meetings. Sunday assembly is a sort of form of secular religion which was created by a couple of comedians in England, which then became very popular. So what they wanted to create was a sort of Anglican Sunday evening evensong service where there's some singing, there's some perhaps a short sermon, a reading from prayers, and all these, a lot of ritual. So they cobbled together these kind of secular services built on that same model. And they're quite popular. They spread to, sort of the Dutch do it apparently quite a lot, and other of the English-speaking parts of the world. And then finally we went out to Brazil and did a whole bunch of this particular Afro-Caribbean syncretic religion, which was founded in about 1900. So this is a mixture of Yoruba, West African religion with Roman Catholicism, but it's based on trance. So the lady in the middle with the gold is the high priestess for the meeting. She's running the service. The lady kneeling down in front of her is one of the mediums, and she's actually in the process of going into trance. And then you've got musicians at the back who are playing continuously, as it were. So this is very much a kind of trance-based system. It's kind of interesting. It's very popular. It started as a populist movement in Brazil about 100 years ago. And then we had this yoga teacher come and run some yoga classes for us in which she did either a secular version or a religious version. The religious version had all the yoga theory and philosophy, as it were, exactly the same exercises, two different groups. I'll just show you a little bit of the data. These are the bonding index change. So we're asking them to rate their bonding to other members of the congregation for the churches and the Sunday assembly. So before the service and after the service. So you see that and this is paralleling the endorphin activation going on underneath. You can see it's increasing dramatically. Notice that the church service, which has a religious theology to it, if you like, is performing at a higher level than the secular version. I think that's actually quite significant. There's something about a religious context that is ramping up the system, or religious explanation, if you like. And then here's one of our drug experiments where we're giving naltrexone, which locks onto the receptor sites, the endorphin receptor sites in the brain, and blocks the endorphins from getting into it, so you don't get the endorphin hit. And this is a combination of the Umbanda groups and the yoga groups. And you can see the placebo people who got a sugar pill, basically, are doing what would normally happen, which is pain threshold and bonding is going up. But their naltrexone group, who are not getting the endorphin hit, are going down. They're no longer feeling as bonded in. So as rituals of religion and what you do in church services are clearly designed to create this sense of belonging and bonding, is what the message is. And this comes out of these data. Quite nice. This is a big survey that I actually did, which was asking people how often they went to church, running from once a year down to daily, and rating their bonding levels to the congregation. These are mostly from same measures used by the British government statistical survey departments. How many close friends they had, their trust in the local community, engagement with the local community, their sense of life being worthwhile, how happy they were, and so on and so forth. And this picture, I think, is their bonding to the congregation. That's the typical picture for all of these measures. If they're going regularly, weekly or daily, they really are much more bonded, they're happier, they are more engaged and trusting of their local community, and they feel that they have more friends. Typically, we're expecting to say 5 people. That's the sort of normal number of close friends, what we call the shoulders to cry on friends, who will come to your support when you need help. People who go daily treat the whole congregation of maybe 80 people, and that's just this extraordinary kick they're getting, essentially. Okay, so if religion's about bonding communities, we might expect there to be an optimal congregation size. It's about 150 to 200, ideally. Now, here are some data from the 19th century Americans, where you had lots of weird communities going out into the Midwest and setting themselves up. Some of these were religious, some of them were secular. The religious ones, you probably know a lot of them. They're people like the Mormons, the Shakers, the Hutterites, those sort of people, because those communities stayed. Most of the secular ones died out after sometimes only a couple of years. The reason they died out is usually the founder ran off either with all the community's money or with all the community's wives, right? Literally, over and over again. And the whole thing caused it to disband. That much less likely to happen if there was a religious sort of framework, philosophy to the thing. And what's interesting is that the secular communities were much smaller when they were founded. The average size at foundation was 50, that top graph. For religious communes, it was 150, 3 times as big. And when you look at their survival times, so on the bottom graph, the upright axis there is how many years the community survived for before it disappeared, and the bottom was the size at foundation. The lower curve is the secular ones, the upper curve, the religious ones. The average optimum size for survival, to maximize survival, for secular ones was 64, for religious ones 170. That's the foundation size. And the difference was the average duration, lifetime, for the secular ones was just 7 years. The average lifetime for the religious ones is 70 years. So something is keeping the lid down on the frictions that arise from living in large groups, particularly in religious ones. There's something about the religious component which is doing that, and therefore allowing them to hold not only bigger groups together, but to do so for longer. However, one of the interesting things about religion, I think, is that it constantly bubbles up sects and cults at the bottom. All the major religions have this problem. If you look at the history of Christianity, constantly, right from 50 AD onwards, literally it started just after the crucifixion, you get little breakaway groups, often with very weird theologies. Islam had the same problem. Within 5 years of the death of the Prophet, it is split into two major branches, Sunni and Shia. Every big religion has this problem dealing with these very small religions that come at the bottom. They're often very strange. So here's a little sample. Some of them you'll know. You probably know the Bhagwan Sri here at the bottom, who had his infamous colony in Oregon, caused a lot of trouble. David Koresh of Waco fame. The gentleman on the right, Brother Twelfth, turned out to be a rather prosaic gentleman from Birmingham in England. Set up the Aquarian Foundation colony in Vancouver, north of Vancouver City on the Vancouver Island, and eventually got found out and fled with one of his lady friends and all the money, and went to Switzerland. Allegedly died in Neuchâtel in Switzerland at the 1930s. But they're what is very characteristic of them is they're small, they're built around a charismatic leader whom everybody treats as a god. They're very emotionally intense. There's a deep sense of commitment, both to the founder and to the religion, and it creates very often this sense of what the anthropologists have called proxemic desire, this desire by the followers to do things like be near the guru, to eat the guru's leftover food, to wear the guru's cast-off clothes, to sleep where the guru has slept, and even to sleep with the guru. So there's a major, major sexual component to it. And you see this very commonly in all these kinds of sects. You saw it in a lot of these sects, Protestant sects that sprung up all over Europe after Luther set Northern Europe free, as it were. A lot of them, very famous groups, had often had very weird practices and also were highly, highly sexualized in their behavior. Not for everybody. It's usually the founders that have a monopoly, and the founders are usually male, or the ones that are managing it. The Quakers are not called the Quakers for nothing. They're very sedate and good citizens now, but when they started, they got the nickname the Quakers because they went into trance all the time. The Shakers, who are a derivative of the Quakers in North America, got the name Shakers for the same reason. So it's all back to this very deeply intense, very ancient kind of types of religion. Question is, why should these groups be small? And the answer is it's because this is the size of group that dominates our social life. This is the natural size of your individual social circles. It's about 150. It's what's known as Dunbar's number. Here are some of our data. This is one European country which remains utterly anonymous, but it's a mobile phone data set from their whole year of data calls. It's 20% of the entire population, approximately. There are 6 million subscribers in our data set. 6 billion phone calls, and we're looking at the number of people that they call. They have a relationship with because they get called back. That's the criteria. The person has to call that number and be called back by that number. Count all that up, you get that smear, which is that sort of orange, yellowy green smear, and the black line is the sort of statistical mean put through it, as it were, the average number is 130. Right? 130 people in their phone calls. There's a few people with lots, there's a few people with less. But that number, somewhere close to 150, just turns up all over the place. So we've got it as the ideal size for congregations, for church planting in the kind of Pentecostalist type end of Protestantism. They've done a lot of study on this. What size of congregation works best? When should you split a congregation and start a new one? And it turns out that 150 is the key dividing point. It's a basic size of hunter-gatherer clans. It's the size of your typical social network. That's the average. 154 is the average from about 25 studies that we've done all over the world, some of which are very, very large. And there's two nice data sets, one from England in 1087, the Doomsday Book, which, if you remember your history, a bunch of Norwegians who just arrived and taken over, colonized us, decided they better find out how much tax we owed them. So they did a complete census. Turns out to be an absolute goldmine. The average size of villages in England and Wales under the Norman areas was exactly 150, and 7 centuries later, from now we're looking at church records data, it was still 150. Yeah, it doesn't mean to say there aren't big cities and towns, but we're talking about villages. The average village size was still 150. It's a lovely Italian data set from the Alps up in the north that covers a span from 1250 AD to 1850 AD, exactly the same. The average village size, it was about 170. It's very skewed. The modal village size was actually about 145. So this number turns up all over the place. By far the best one, to which you might even have contributed, is a study that looked at 61 million Facebook pages, and they totted up all the number of friends on Facebook pages, and the average was exactly 149. Right? So on the strength of that, you don't often get a prediction that close to real data in my field. But having got one like that, I feel entitled on the Monopoly game to go past go, collect my $200, and I'm going to buy both of Abramovich's yachts on the strength of it. Right? Absolutely magical. Okay, when did these religions in general evolve? Religion requires you to explain things to other people, right? Otherwise, it's not a religion. It's just a belief, personal belief. So 2 things are important: that you have language, that you can explain complicated concepts, and secondly, you have to be able to understand what somebody else is thinking. This is known as mentalizing, but very important social skill, cognitive skill, that children are not born with, but they develop gradually over a course of time into their teenage years. But it allows us to handle other people's mind states and figure out why people are doing the things they're doing. So what we want to know is, when did language evolve and when did mentalizing evolve? And that tells us when it was possible for religion to have evolved. It can't have been before those two. So this is mentalizing, just to give you a picture of it. You can see the increasing number of mind states that can be handled. Sort of under 5s, it's just your own mind state. You believe that something's the case. We adults can do, or the average adult can do 5 mind states, including their own. Now, this is interesting, really interesting stuff, because it actually dictates how novelists and dramatists construct their literature. Shakespeare is absolutely beautiful in how he handles the audience's mind states in terms of the number of speaking parts on the stage at any one time. He keeps absolutely rigidly within those limits, never pushes the audience beyond it. Okay, so if we have, in terms of thinking about religion, the one in the middle there, Jill, who has second order mind state, she believes that Jack believes that something is the case, that essentially she can do something like, I believe that God thinks. Well, you may think that, fine. Why should I worry? An adult with 5 orders to play with can do something much more complicated, which starts to look like a common agreement. We both agree to this. So that's the key we're looking for. When does that appear in human evolution? Okay. We can use some of our earlier results on primates, the relationship between primate group size and primate brain size, known as the social brain hypothesis, which is these data in the bottom corner, just to show you they exist, to estimate the size of fossil group sizes for our fossil ancestors. And that's them there, in order of age. So the youngest ones on the left, fossil Homo sapiens, that's not us, it's our fossil ancestors for our species on the right. And the black dots are the estimates of group size estimated off brain size for these species. And you can see for a very long time in the Australopithecine phase, so up until about 2 million years ago, they're operating at about chimpanzee level. They were just upright chimpanzees, basically. And then it starts to take off with the appearance of the genus Homo, our genus, rising to this very high level of about 150 modern humans. The Neanderthals and our other archaic humans, the Heidelberg folk, they are not at the same level as modern humans. So now what we want to do is to map onto that the mechanisms for speech and hearing production that allow language and mentalizing, because we can map both of those onto brain size, essentially. The whole bundle of things, anatomical markers, that point to speech breath control, basically, that allows us to do these long exhalations without having to draw a breath in, which is crucial for speech. Monkeys and apes can't do that for various anatomical reasons. That seems to kick in with the archaic humans about 500,000 years ago. So the green part, all those species have these human-like speech and hearing anatomical bits, and everybody before that has primate-like, monkey and ape-like ones. That means they wouldn't been able to engage in speech as we have it, as modern humans do. So that puts a minimum layer. Now, what about the mentalizing? Well, the dotted line down there, which is where the chimpanzees sit, is second-order mentalizing. I believe that you think something's the case. 5-year-olds can do it, chimpanzees can do it. It's about their limit. The equivalent for us is fifth-order mentalizing. That sits very comfortably at that level and goes right through our little dot. Remember, this is just being predicted by brain size. And then the Neanderthals and Heidelbergs are predicted to be fourth-order mentalizers. There's one mentalizing difference. That level of mentalizing makes a big difference in the kinds of propositions they can create for religious significance. Makes a big difference. They can have what you might call a personal religion, but not a communal religion, social religion. It also affects the kind of jokes they told, because they would not have been able to do sophisticated jokes like we do. So we've shown with other studies that how funny you think a joke is, or even a piece of literature, fiction, and even cartoons, we've shown this with cartoons, how funny you think they are is determined by how many mind states are in it. So the more mind states that are in it, up to level 5, and you've got to remember yourself, gets one of those mind states, we think it's funny. If it goes beyond 5, it becomes postmodern literature, and you just can't work out what the hell is going on, right? Just to give it a kind of benchmark, what it meant for the Neanderthals is, yes, they could tell jokes, but their jokes were the jokes of 14-year-olds, which is when we get fourth-order mentalizing, right? So they've been very good at boys' lavatory humor, and they would have thought them incredibly funny, right? But when you're fifth-order mentalizing, as we are, they're not quite so funny, right? Now, what that tells us is religion probably would not have occurred before the appearance of our own species. The Neanderthals might have had some kind of religion, mystical sort of experiences, going deep in caves, but they would not have had any kind of formalized religion where they were able to describe what was going on and have some kind of notional theology, even of the kind that exists in hunter-gatherer religions. That seems to requires fifth-order mentalizing that would not have happened till our appearance. So, when did the doctrinal religions appear? Why did they appear? They all appeared in this part of the world. what's known as the northern subtropical zone. It's a little band about 12 degrees of latitude wide that sits above the northern tropic, and there's a similar southern one that sits below the southern tropic. But for some reason, they all seem to have appeared. That's where we see the first archaeological evidence of temples, of priests, of rituals, sacrifices, and even moral codes. So what's going on here? Temple, this is the kind of thing you're looking at. These kind of things did not appear anywhere in the archaeological record before about 7 or 8,000 years ago. The reason is this. That's what the Sahara looked like up there between about 9,000, 10,000 years ago and up to about 4,000 years ago. It was lush. There were huge lakes up there, major, massive river systems. The only one that's left of all those big, about 5 or 6 massive rivers going north-south, the only one that's left is the Nile. And its size now is about 10% of what its size was then. It was really well watered. There were water birds, there were crocodiles, there were hippos, there was all sorts of stuff like that up there. Incredibly rich. And it was only within this very narrow latitudinal band. And here's why. If you look at the disease load, the number of diseases, pathogens that you have in the contemporary world, and plot it against latitude, that's the pattern you get. It's very high in the equator. Known that for a long time. The tropics are a breeding ground for new pathogens, constantly producing new pathogens. But as you go further and further north, the seasonality kills the pathogens off. So once you get past the subtropical zones, the end of the tropic, there in the middle, where the red bar is, disease load drops dramatically. We're very lucky in Europe and Asia in those terms. But the growing season shows the opposite trend. So although the growing season in the tropics on the equator is very high, it's 12 months of a year you can grow stuff. By the time you get up here, I don't know what it is, about 3 months or something, judging by your garden plants, and they all give up. And of course, if you go further north, you can hardly grow anything at all in Norway. But the point is that those two are split apart. Look how separated they are. If you plot the combined measure in terms of the optimal conditions, so minimizing disease load and maximizing growing season, look at how it peaks right in the subtropical zone. It's really bad in the tropics, but it's because of high disease load. It's really bad up here in the temperate zone, but it's because the growing season is dropping very fast. But right in the middle, you've got low disease load and maximum growing time. So populations were just exploding. This is actually what was happening. They're populations in various parts of Africa estimated from the current genetics, right? Geneticists are very clever people. They go mumbo jumbo, and they show you a graph like that. It looks brilliant. But it's true, we believe. This is a lecture on religion. Get with it. So this is as close as you'll ever get to seeing the real population sizes. But I just draw your attention so this is in the last 20,000 years. This grey band in the middle is this what's called the African humid period, or the green Sahara, when the Sahara was really rich. And look at the black line there, which is the hunter-gatherers in the eastern Mediterranean. The population size is just, literally you can figure out the total female population size from the mitochondrial DNA of an area. Look how it's just going crazy up long before anybody else is. The South African hunter-gatherers are just flatlining right the way through because nothing happened down in the southern, they're sitting in the southern subtropical zone, nothing happened down there. And the West African farmers started farming late, because they had to get control over the disease loads down there. They didn't really get going on farming until after 5,000 years ago. And then they started to explode. Those 2 points there is when agriculture came in, and those 2 points where you see doctrinal religion. What's the significance of agriculture here? is because they had to have agriculture to live in villages. Otherwise, you would not be able to get enough food. So we didn't live in villages because of agriculture. We invented agriculture in order to live in villages. And then we had this problem. How do you stop all these people killing each other? You need something to dampen down the stresses and fractiousness within the community. And here's the problem, literally. These are average village sizes in the Levant, Turkey and Palestine, Israel, Syria area. From about 10,000 years ago. You can see they're just going through the roof. This is for protection. What was happening is the population was exploding because the growing conditions were so good, and people were being forced to live in villages for protection. That's why they've got walls around them. That's why they've got no openings on the outside of houses. That's why you go in from the top of a house and you have very narrow alleyways. They're trying to protect themselves. That's Jericho as it's been reconstructed about this time. Look at its walls. They were there for protection. And protection from these guys, the guys in the next door village. They're not Danes and Vikings coming around from the north. These are just the people from the next door village, harassing you and trying to steal your crops. So we can point to doctrinal religions appearing at that point in an attempt to try and allow people to live in these compressed things. So what does this tell us about the revealed religions? Well, it turns out the revealed religions first appeared in exactly the same place. There's the subtropical zone. Each of those symbols is one of the major modern revealed religions. The 5 Abrahamic religions, the Shinto in Japan, 2 Chinese monotheistic religions predating Confucianism, in India, Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, Sikhism, etc., etc. One of the Egyptian religions, which was for a brief period monotheistic, usually they had polytheistic ones, but for a one king's reign, they had a monotheistic religion. That's it there. And then there's a bunch of, a couple in North America, the Incas and in the south and the Aztecs in the north, and a bunch of interesting cases who now live in Eastern Africa. So these are the Cushitic religions, which include the Somalis and a lot of tribes in Ethiopia, who appear to be a right-hand Ethiopian branch, come down into East Africa with various tribes like the Rendile and people like that in Kenya. And then on the left-hand side is the Nilo-Hamitic group, who end up with a Maasai at the bottom. What's interesting about these 2 groups, both of them started up in the Sudan, right on the southern edge of the northern subtropical zone. They're monotheistic, and very characteristic of all these religions, they're pastoralists. So almost all these monotheistic religions are started by pastoralists all around the world in that little subtropical zone. You can see down in the south, aside from the Incas down there, very, very little happens, and that's because it's mostly desert in the south. It was never as rich. And here was the probable reason why this happened. This is the Nile outflow, and you can see around 5,000 or 6,000 years ago, at the tail end of the African humid period, the Green Sahara period, its outflow was way, way up at the top. Then at 4.2 thousand years ago, you hit what's called the 4.2 climatic event, when everything dried up very suddenly. There was no rain. The Sahara became the Sahara in 300 years. Literally, in 300 years, it went from being lush to being desert. And then it collapsed again further. Around about 3,000 years ago, there's another climatic event. And so what you've now got, huge population, and suddenly they've got no food. So they're all killing each other for their food. And that maybe the revealed religions were as an attempt to hold big groups together for the further protection against this. So just to give you the sense of this, the subtropical zone, there's the tropical Cancer, the blue line at the top there, and the little subtropical zone. 10,000 years ago, baboons, that was their northern limit, right, up in the top of the Sahara. Within 5,000 or so years, it was down there. That's their modern northern limit. That's something like 1,200 kilometers. Everything in the middle was wiped out by the Sahara. It just became desert. And it happened very, very quickly, 300 years. So people did not have a lot of time to adapt to it. What that triggered was the biggest problem the Eastern Mediterranean had ever faced. This is known as the Sea Peoples. Nobody knows who they are. They were just called, in all the literature, they were called the Sea Peoples. They appeared over the Mediterranean from Europe on boats, and they tried to invade. Around about 3,000 years ago, so just after that second crash in the Nile outflow, the climate at 3,200, they had two massive battles with the Egyptians who actually defeated them, held them at bay, and then said, all right, if you behave yourselves, you can stay. Because they arrived with their cattle and their wives and their kids and everything. The peoples on the mainland of the Levant there, Palestine, Israel, Lebanon, and so on, Syria, had a much, much worse time. Every city within walking distance, about 30 kilometers of the coast, was destroyed. They are a meter deep in ash at that point. All of them completely laid waste. And also along the southern coast of Turkey there. Who were they? They were fleeing dreadful conditions in Europe, looking for somewhere better. They came through Greece. Were they the Greeks? No. They came from much further north in Europe. Got the Greeks a bad name. What we think they eventually became was the Phoenicians. They were the ancestors of the Phoenicians, and that's why the Phoenicians were such great traders. Their whole lives were built around boating in the Mediterranean. And that pressure destroyed almost all the major civilizations and empires. So remember this side, every single empire across that whole band, it goes right through to China, collapsed. So the Harappan Empire in the Ganges Bay in India, over in the Great Basin, the nascent Chinese early empire that had built up, and in the Eastern Mediterranean, probably the Western Mediterranean, the archaeology is not so good there. All these kind of states just collapsed under the same pressure of people. And what emerged in that ashes was these revealed religions, which were much stricter, much more demanding, if you like, but had a God that was interested in you, unlike the gods of the doctrinal religions where you have to make sacrifices, and if you don't make their sacrifices to them, Odin, Freya, then they beat the hell out of you, right? And they're rather vindictive gods. This is a caring God who looked after you, as it were. So what it produced was this sense of binding together. And you can see this is modern data from Uganda, Sierra Leone, and Tajikistan. It's not my data, it's Joe Henrich's data, where they looked at the difference between different parts of these countries in the aftermath of the civil wars that they'd had there. And the light blue is religious adherence in areas where they had not been affected by the civil war. The dark blue is the religious adherence in the places that had been directly affected. In other words, the Ukraine of these places, if you like. And you can see this uplift in religious attachment that follows on from this. It provides comfort and support and so on. So why do these revealed religions do this? I think it's a two-way process. One is you've got the bottom-up opium of the masses kind of thing through this endorphin system, which just makes you feel very bonded. So you're willing to do things out of obligation to the community, to create the community, as it were. But also, you've got what's known as the policeman in the sky syndrome coming in. That's why it's a monotheistic God. You know, you may think you can get away with doing whatever you get away with after the dance on Saturday night in the village hall at the back of the bicycle sheds, and we don't see, but believe me, somebody is watching you, and he's omniscient, right? It's that sense that you can't get away with your bad behavior. So just one last point to make out of all this, which I think is very germane and interesting here. These are current numbers of different tribal religions in different countries. So each dot is one country. The white dots in the southern half of Africa, the world, southern hemisphere. The black dots are the northern part of the hemisphere, northern hemisphere, as a function of at their absolute latitude, and it's the number of religions per million people. Just look how at the equator, this is very high. There are lots of religions, and these are all small religions, small doctrinal religions. Each kind of little region has its own little religion. But as you go further north, you get fewer and fewer religions until you get into the subtropical zone, and what do you have? One religion per million people. And that seems to have been the key cutoff during this revealed what's known as the Axial Age. These religions appeared when political units, countries, if you like, were about 1 million people in size. And at that point, up in that subtropical zone, everybody belongs to one big religion, whereas at the tropics, there are many religions that you can belong to. So thank you very much. I have no idea how long I've been talking, but you can ask some questions.